Okay. Hi, Dolores. How are you? I'm glad you're here. Our guest has not checked in yet tonight. Oh, she's just arrived.
Hi, Joseph. How are you?
Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
Pretty good. Let me... one thing.
Okay, looks like our sound is okay.
Cool. Yeah, does my sound good for you?
Yeah, it's very good. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, let's spend a few minutes sharing to Facebook, since there's no advance warning on Facebook, and then we'll come back in maybe 3 minutes or so and begin. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Hi, Greg. It's good to see you here. And Greg says hi to you, Rebecca.
Hi, Greg.
And please share, folks. We won't have a lot of time to do that tonight.
Hi, Dolores.
Yeah, Dolores is watching us both on Facebook and on YouTube. And she'll share on both places. Okay, so welcome to the In-Depth Show. This is Rebecca Parsons with me tonight. She's running for Congress in the Washington CD-06 district. And she is an extremely progressive candidate. She's for Medicare for All, and she's for the Green New Deal. And this is your second run, isn't it, Rebecca?
It is, yeah, and thanks for having me on the show. And I see a bunch of people saying hi in the chat. Thank you, Jeffrey, Greg, Carmen. Nice to see everybody here, and thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm running in Washington's 6th District on a progressive platform of Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, and Housing for All.
Right. And housing is a very important issue for you, isn't it? I noticed
Yeah,
that's very central to your platform.
Yeah, it's a big issue for me because it's a big issue in the district. Over the winter, since my last campaign, I was helped co-found a group called Tacoma Housing Now that occupied empty buildings to get more housing for homeless people. We were able to get some concessions from the city, like 200 shelter beds added to the system in the city. They extended a shelter that was going to close at the end of the year, December 31st, when it's the coldest. They actually extended it through to the spring, giving people shelter during winter. So we were able to get some important wins there from the city, but it's still a huge issue here in Tacoma and also in small towns and rural parts of the district. It's just whether you're renting or buying or you're homeless on the streets or you're living in a car or couch surfing, everywhere housing is a huge, huge issue in the district.
Yeah, so it sounds like you really accomplished a lot.
Yeah, we were able to get a lot from the city, and it was that direct action that really pushed them to take some action. They've been saying for years that homelessness is a crisis, and somehow, even while they declare a state of emergency about it, the problem just gets worse and worse. And so they needed some pushing, and they still do. I'm sure we won't be letting up.
Yes, I'm sure. You're also a whole Washington activist as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I am, and I've served on the board of Whole Washington, and I'm an activist with Whole Washington. Yeah, love the group, and I like the approach of going for Medicare for all federally, as I would do if I were in Congress, and then also pursuing it at the state level, and see which one gets us to true universal health care nationwide first. I think it makes sense to try more than one approach at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. And I see actually some interaction with respect to the approaches. Some people seem to think one is going to detract actually from the other. But I don't think that way. I think it's one movement. And I think if you get success at the state level, it's going to reinforce the movement at the federal level. And I think the more states can follow a particular model, and it seems like Washington has a very good model, the more likely it is that this is going to really accelerate the state level movement.
Yeah, definitely. If we get it in Washington State or California or somewhere else, and then it starts to, we start to see the positive effects. Spending on medical care goes down in the state. Fewer people are dying because they don't have health care, and we can point to these real world effects and show how it works. And that it can work. Of course it can. We all know it. Anybody watching this probably preaching to the choir, we already know it could work. But if we have it in one state and then we have those concrete benefits to point to, that would, definitely help federally as well. And I see Gregory in the chat said a federal job guarantee would solve the homeless crisis. Yeah, I support a federal job guarantee because it would be a huge help with the homelessness crisis. And it also ties in with the Green New Deal. Because we need to retrofit our buildings to be running on renewable energy. We need to get the electric grid to be running on renewable energy. We need to get broadband, high-speed internet to everybody in the country. All of these things are labor-intensive processes that would create jobs. When people have an income, they can afford housing. So it really all ties in together.
The federal job guarantee is an important element of the Green New Deal also.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so part of the agenda, part of the program. And yes, it would solve the homeless problem if everybody could turn to a job that was at a living wage. Now, one of the problems we may see, though, is that by the time the Green New Deal passes, the $15 an hour wage may not actually be a living wage. I suspect in many parts of Washington right now that it's not a living wage.
Yeah, that's true in this area, Tacoma and Seattle, and then many other parts of the state as well. It's not $15 an hour still wouldn't be enough. Um, I think it makes more sense to have a federal minimum wage that is tied to the cost of housing in the area where you live. So it's kind of like a COLA, cost of living adjustment. It's a factor that takes into account, where you live and how much costs are. Let's say that the formula is you shouldn't spend more than 25 or 30% of your income on rent. Then you can look at what average housing costs are in the area, and then the minimum wage should be tied to that, so that a family, somebody can afford a home, or a parent with 2 kids, they can afford, enough room, an apartment or house with enough room for them. I think that would make more sense, but definitely, and also $15, that was the fight for 15. That was a fight that started 5, maybe almost 10 years ago. And so, costs have only gone up since then. So 15 is
Yes,
definitely
it
not enough.
started in 2011 or 2012.
Yeah, almost a decade.
Almost
So
a decade. It's taken us so long to get there, and they're still quoting the same thing. Which I think, is not a good idea. But I agree with your cost of living adjustment idea. I've been preaching that for years myself. But why would you prefer the housing cost as the indicator for evaluating cost as opposed to the CPI?
Because I think housing, I would consider the CPI, but housing, because it's so basic, it's such a basic need that we need. And so if we're going to look at like housing, food, healthcare, just the absolute essentials somebody needs to afford, and then also within in my ideal world, housing would be guaranteed as a right. It wouldn't be a profit generating industry. It wouldn't exist solely to generate profit. Housing would be for housing. And if there are some small landlords who make a little bit of money because of that, sure, that's no problem. But the main goal of housing is to house people. But given the system we have now, we're not in that. Of course, we're in a profit driven housing system. And so prices are just wildly swinging, I mean, Tacoma, for example, last year, I think, was the #1 city in the nation for the rate at which rent is rising.
Yes.
And so I think, given that it's like, it's such an essential need, and it also it's rising so quickly, it would make sense to tie it to that. But, cost of, or consumer price index might be a good one as well.
The CPI, though, contains housing costs, right? In other words,
I believe so, yeah.
CPI.
Yeah, but what's interesting is when they talk in inflation about inflation in the news, they'll talk about CPI, and then sometimes they strip out the most volatile parts of it. I think food, energy costs, because they fluctuate too wildly, so they don't want to include it when they're talking about inflation. It's like, well, they're fluctuating wildly and affecting people's pocketbooks. I don't know how you could not count it.
Yeah, I don't know how you could not count it either, but I suppose if housing costs were to begin to fluctuate as they are in your district, they might not count that, right?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact term, but it's a certain inflation index where one of them is kind of the standard they prefer to look at, and to do that, they exclude the most wildly fluctuating goods, which are essentials that people need to survive. So it's just one more example to me of how divorced mainstream economics is from what people actually need. I could go on and on about that, but yeah, for example, like the unemployment rate, the Fed, when it talks about reaching full employment, that actually that does not mean that 100% of people out there who want a job actually have employment. The Fed determines that actually we want a certain percentage, whatever that percentage is at a given time, to be unemployed. We need that extra workforce, that reserve supply of labor that doesn't have a job. And then when they're unemployed, then we consider it full employment. Like, what about those people who want a job? And so, there's so many examples like that where economics, mainstream economics, which is informing policymakers in Congress, is not serving regular people at all.
Oh, yes, I think that's true. Specifically, the headline unemployment number is the U3 index. Then they also have a U6 index, which takes into account people who are partly employed, part-time employed. Then if you put those two things together, it still leaves out people who they don't consider part of the labor force any longer because they weren't able to find a job. Okay, so they dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a disemployment indicator. They could easily compute one, okay, and report one. And if they did, then they would probably find they would add another 6% or so to the U6 index, but they don't do that. So what would you do as a congressperson about that?
I would say the economy should be at a new definition of full employment, which is that everybody who wants a job has one, and it's at a living wage. And the government can afford to do that with something like a national jobs program, which we did kind of a version of during the New Deal. And the New Deal had problems, a lot of very serious problems. It was implemented in a way it excluded certain classes of workers, and those industries that excluded were predominantly people of color working in those industries. It was designed in a racist way, but it did show that the government can institute these big programs employing millions of people, and the stuff they laid down during that, like the Civilian Conservation Corps, they're like roads and shelters and national parks and bridges and stuff that we're still using today. And so I would support that kind of program because stuff like the Green New Deal, transitioning to 100% renewable energy, we need government investment to make that happen. Just relying on the private sector would take too long, and it would create a lot of jobs in the process. On another note, I see Gregory said, did you see where Germany... Yeah, in Berlin, they had a referendum vote to have the city government buy homes from corporate landlords.
Yes,
they supported it. I think that's a great thing to do. We need more public housing and social housing.
Right, but to go back to the Green New Deal, the Green New Deal seems to me is a very vague term. We could mean what AOC means by it. That's a little more specific, but not much more specific. But when people say Green New Deal, they might be referring to Bernie's 16.2 trillion program over 10 years, or they might be referring to the $10 trillion program that was being supported by the Sunrise Movement, okay, and other such movements. Or they might be referring to something smaller, like the $6 trillion that Bernie was lately trying to get, okay, but couldn't get. Or they might be talking about Howie Hawkins's $42 trillion Green New Deal, which of course is far different, okay, from all the others, since it's close to 3 times the size, okay, of Bernie's. When you say Green New Deal, what do you mean?
I mean a program, and I think that's a good point because a lot of people use the term differently. I like that because it means you can define it for yourself what you mean by it. What I mean is not just kind of greening what we already have. More and more the economy is turning us. In some ways, it feels like we're going back to feudalism, where you own nothing, you rent everything. You work for the company like Amazon, and then there's the company store where you buy your groceries, and the company housing where you live, and the company school where you send your children, and your whole life is just kind of owned by this corporation. I wouldn't want to do a Green New Deal that basically just greens that whole process. So we're all still serfs, but it's I'm not sure if there's a comment from KRTD. I'm not sure if that's to me.
Yeah, TD Media is Shane Coughlin. He's the president, okay, of KRTD Media. And, oh, no, that's a comment to me.
Oh, okay.
Said that I didn't have a chance to call him. That's right. I didn't have a chance to call him. Right. Okay, so anyway, that was just a personal comment. But to get back to the Green New Deal, Okay, I cut you off, I think, in mid-sentence, so I'd like you to continue.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't want to just green what we have right now. So we're all just, eco-friendly serfs to an eco-friendly, all-powerful boss. We need to do, in my opinion, a Green New Deal that gives workers more power. I view it as economic democracy. We have political democracy, which, we have it in name. In a lot of ways, we don't actually have it because we have policies that are so popular with the broad majority of the American public, like Medicare for all and a jobs guarantee, and we can't get it done in Congress. And why is that? And that shows kind of a disconnect in our democracy. But so that's political democracy. But then what about economic democracy, where you have a say in what goes on in your workplace? Or if your company is struggling, you decide whether to take one route, add a new product line, or just sell it and ship it overseas. Like, you actually have a say in whether your job gets shipped overseas or not. That kind of thing is what I would want to incorporate as part of the Green New Deal. And I would want to have all of this government investment go into, so it's public money that the government is spending. I would want that public money, which is our money, to be building stuff that we own and not have it be public-private partnerships, which just means we use public money to line the coffers of giant multinational corporations that don't have our best interests in mind.
Yes, that is generally what's known as lemon socialism, and we have a lot of lemon socialism right now. But it's also true, and it seems to me that you probably have an appreciation for Rick Wolf's work. He's extremely oriented to democracy in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the job guarantee connecting up to democracy in the workplace?
So I was looking at the comments. Where do I see? I would hope the Green New Deal would be passed in tandem with something like the PRO Act. And then people, when there's a job guarantee, you also, and with the PRO Act, more labor protections in place. But then let's say there is a jobs guarantee, suddenly you're not at the mercy of your employer. And it's like, if you lose your job, you can't make rent the next month and you'll get evicted. If you maybe say have a terrible boss, then you can look for another job that has a better boss or has a better location or whatever that might be. And so that actually tilts things more over on the side of the workers, because they would have more leverage than the bosses and the owners of companies. So I think it would strengthen workers, right?
Oh, yes, that would certainly strengthen workers. But I was thinking about the structure of the job guarantee program itself. For example, the program that was advocated by Jared Bernstein and his name will come to me in just a minute. They co-authored a book, on the job guarantee. And but that job guarantee had a lower base wage than some of the other people who advocate for the job guarantee. For example, Pavlina Chernyeva's version, of the job guarantee is one that sees a great deal of participation from the people who sign up for the job guarantee. They have certain freedoms, including the freedom to propose entirely new social ventures and to join with other people in the job guarantee, to propose those particular social ventures. And there is, in her ideas, or there are in her ideas anyway, scope for participation. In other words, people could define cooperatives as the social ventures. And then you would have democracy in the workplace in the context of the job guarantee program.
I love the sound of that, and I'm very interested in cooperatives as a way to for workers to have more democracy in the workplace. I know that's something Richard Wolff is very interested in as well, right? He talks about that a lot in research.
Right, but for you as a congressperson, you might have a voice in structuring the legislation for the job guarantee when it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might well have a role in giving scope to the possibility of people in the job guarantee program actually starting cooperatives in order to perform tasks of social value to the community, with the federal government actually footing the bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would support that, definitely. I'm actually right now trying to get a workers' cooperative started in Tacoma as a house cleaning co-op. And I have a couple of friends who belong to a trucking co-op called 1917 Logistics. And they just started a few months ago, and they already are fully, all full up with contracts. Like, the work keeps them very busy. So it works, there's demand out there. And I, companies like Mondragon in Spain have shown just how successful co-ops can be. And also Italy has an interesting program where there are some, I think they're called provinces, like states in Italy, where co-ops are a very big share of the local economy because there's government incentive to form co-ops. And so I think that would be wonderful. And that's something that I would push for as part of a jobs guarantee.
So you would be looking at the models in Spain, okay, and in Italy for inspiration in starting the job guarantee program here.
Yeah, I think they have something to teach us. It would, it would need to be adapted for us and our system. But yeah, it's definitely an inspiration, something to learn from.
Okay, so the next question I have is, of course, political questions. We currently have a situation where the CPC in Congress is called upon to buck the rest of the Democratic Party, since now that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer seem to have decided that they can do nothing with Joe Manchin, okay, and Kirsten Sinema. They now turn around to the progressives and they break the deal that was previously constructed. Okay, and they say, okay, now you have to vote for something less. In other words, it's no longer the 3.5T deal. And first of all, how do you see the progressives in Congress actually reacting to that, okay, at this point? Do you think that they're standing firm?
It seems to me like this is, the first time in a very, very long time, maybe decades, that progressives have used their leverage to this extent, and I'm glad to see it. And I think the idea that there's just nothing leadership can do in the face of some people like Manchin and Sinema is ridiculous. I mean, they could do what they do to progressives, fall in line, or we'll fund a challenger to you. We'll primary you out of your seat if you don't do this. And the bills themselves are an improvement on what we have right now. There are really important things in them, like universal childcare, and some measures on climate. There's housing funding. At the same time, they also include fossil fuel subsidies. They include provisions to make it easier to push through new fossil fuel projects, and they expand drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. So they do. I would vote for them, and I would be with that bloc in Congress right now that's holding the line and trying to push this through. But at the same time, recognize that it's not enough, and where the climate crisis we're in is a total catastrophe. And these bills don't rise to the moment nearly enough. What we should have is we should seek to end fossil fuel infrastructure and building as soon as we can, and instead be doing building plans to generate green energy, which would itself create millions of good jobs. So, environment and jobs, would go together. Something that's historically environment and labor been at odds at times. Like here with the challenge we face, we need to create a lot of jobs in order to get our electric grid, housing, cars, everything over to renewable energy. So why not go big? I don't understand why Democrats are negotiating with themselves when they have House, Senate, and White House.
Right. Okay. So you agree, I'm getting the impression, okay, that you agree much more with Howie Hawkins's version, okay, of the New
The
Deal.
Green New Deal.
Yes, the Green New Deal rather than others.
Yeah, I see some people calling it like a people's Green New Deal as opposed to
The
I
People's
know,
Green New Deal.
a big bank's Green New Deal. Yeah, so I think I like thinking of it that way, people's Green New Deal.
Yeah, so do I. I like thinking of it that way too.
And there was an author, I can't remember his name now, but he was on Revolutionary Left Radio podcast I like, and he was talking about that. And I think that might even be the name of his book. I haven't read it, but A People's Green New Deal. And it's about that. Like, we don't want to funnel trillions of dollars into making us even worse off economically than we are right now. And that would be my benchmark.
You're right. Okay, just another thought. The road to serfdom idea. Okay, it seems to me what Hayek was doing there was outlining the real road to serfdom, which is the road we're on now.
Yeah, he was projecting. His philosophy was the road to serfdom, not ours.
His philosophy was exactly the road to serfdom. To come back to what's going on in Congress right now, though, okay, are you seeing the progressives as really standing that firm, okay, or do you think that with the pressure on them, they will begin to compromise and allow the $3.5 trillion overall deal to be substantially cut, okay, in places? In other words, how do you think they're going to negotiate, okay, at this point?
Okay. I mean, given past...
Okay, a little more to clarify it, okay, just a little more. They can insist that they're standing firm, okay, and they want a reconciliation bill, and they're not going to vote for the infrastructure bill until they get to the reconciliation bill. But then in the context of the negotiating, they could sit still for a bill that cuts the 3.5 T bill way down, and come up with a bill that was 1.5 T or 2 T, and accept that, and then declare victory and say, see how well we did. It has this little goodie in it and that little goodie in it, and the other good little goodie. We're going to run on that.
That's very possible, unfortunately. I hope they don't do that, but I've seen tweets out there. I can't remember who it was, but from various people saying, well, we're supposed to get it down to 1.5 trillion because that's what Joe Manchin wants. Well, what are we going to give up? Are we going to give up housing? Are we going to give up childcare? Are we going to give up dental being part of and it's like, well, you're already kind of then negotiating out in the public sphere where you're already showing that you're even contemplating the idea of giving something up.
So shouldn't they say right now, we all agreed on the 3.5 T deal before. Nothing has changed except for the demands of the conservatives. Therefore, we're not going to change. It's 3.5 T or we're tanking everything. This was one big deal. You agreed to the 3.5 T before and to the general terms, okay, of things. We're not moving one bit. Nothing passes. Nothing passes unless at least this deal passes, because this was our bottom line and we're not moving anymore. And by the way, you have 3 days to agree to this or not. And if you don't agree to it, we're going back up to 6T.
Yeah, I like that kind of negotiating. And they have the numbers to do it. So I think that's absolutely the right way to go. And yeah, and I think they should just be really upfront and more blunt about it. Joe Manchin, I saw a reporter tweet that Joe Manchin claimed he had no idea these bills were tied together. It's like, are you kidding? You're lying. There are quotes of you in the press publicly saying, months ago that you supported it. So I think they should go on the morning shows and be like, Manchin.
And there are video clips of that.
Yeah. You agreed to this and you're lying now.
There have been those film clips. Yeah, so absolutely, that's what's been going on. I'm not sure the progressives, though, should go on the morning shows. First of all, I'm not sure they'll be asked on the morning shows.
They might not be. Yeah, maybe it's a moot point.
It could be they'll be asked on the morning shows, so the morning show people can try to browbeat them, into agreeing. So maybe that's good if they invite them, on the morning shows. Then maybe they'd be in a position to say, okay, you guys, we know what you're doing. You're corporate media, and you're taking the part of what the corporate donors want here. We know it, and you know it. So quit pretending that you're an objective source. They would never get invited on there again, but maybe that's all right.
Yeah, go on the offensive, like Laura Fielding saying in the comments. And then Kay in the comments said,
oh, good.
Yeah, Laura's here. Kay in the comments says, Rokana said if we need to cut it back, we should cut it to 4 years and then run on keeping it. Yeah, that's another good idea. Because right now, there's all the, 3.5 trillion about how much money that is, but it's spread out over a number of years.
Yeah, over
yeah,
10.
and when you actually look at the annual cost, the two bills together are 59% of the annual military budget. And that goes through with hardly any discussion. It's more like, how can we keep adding to it but when it comes to spending on, universal child care or doing something about the climate crisis, then suddenly Joe Manchin is concerned,
I think we all know Joe Manchin is really full of it and lies.
Yeah.
And that he's not to be taken seriously in terms of the content, of what he says. The only thing you can do is to back him up against the wall and say, thus far and no further. And that's it. And if you keep up with this, you get nothing, and we get nothing, but we're willing to walk away from the table. And
up against the wall, Manchin.
Yeah, and it would be the first time in many, many years, that progressives have walked away from the table. And I think they do have to teach a lesson to the rest of the party that they're ready to do that, and they're going to do that in the future continuously. And that if the rest of the party wants to make deals with them, they have to stick with those deals, or there's going to be hell to pay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it might also be time to do some direct action, like what Cori Bush did, sleeping in front of the Capitol for 5 nights. Why not do it now? And I think it's great she did that. And now it's an opportunity to do it before the vote's been taken and before the opportunity, and so instead of waiting until it's been whittled down, why not do some kind of direct action like that now? I think that would be a great way to put pressure on them.
Yes, I think that's a very good idea. But the question is, would they get the approval of Nancy Pelosi to do that now? In other words, they previously
need her approval.
Previously, they had the approval of Nancy Pelosi to do that.
Right.
Okay. So that wasn't an entirely independent sort of protest. The question is, do they have the will to go up against what did they call her? The Mama Bear, against the Mama Bear, and say, just a few days ago, what was that about? The ranting and raving of Nancy Pelosi to AOC. What did she exactly say to AOC? And why did AOC change her vote?
And can we deploy Pelosi to do that to Manchin Cinema? Like maybe go up to them on the walk over to the other side of the Capitol, go on and whisper in their ear, and then they suddenly we need to turn the screws on them.
Yeah, but it seems to me it's Chuck Schumer's role to go over to them.
True.
To read them the Riot Act and hers. But she has some people in the House that she needs to read the Riot Act to, and it isn't AOC. But simply apart from that, why would AOC still be afraid of Nancy Pelosi? She's given her word that this is going to be her last term, as Speaker. They're in a position to hold her to that. So why would they be afraid of her? I mean, she's gone in a very short time anyway.
I don't know. I've heard that these negotiations, when you're in there that the establishment kind of knows the weak points of progressives to get them to cave, and they're really good at pushing those buttons, and maybe it's just hard to withstand all of that. But
So the
I don't know.
question is, do you know what those buttons are?
In meetings, like I've heard that in caucus meetings, all the Democrats and the progressives will be holding out on something, and then they'll say, well, this bill, you might want, I can't remember what the example was, but let's say it was Obamacare, and they wanted the public option, and so they wouldn't vote for Obamacare. It's like, well, if you don't vote for this, then this many people will die, but if you vote for this, then only this many. And they really get at them that way. Progressives want to see something pass, and I think that's something as well that we see with corporate Democrats and Republicans is they don't mind if stuff doesn't pass, but most progressives they did get into it, and they still want to actually help people. And so they can really apply that pressure. So it'll be a meeting of hundreds of people with all of those. Yeah. So I'm not saying that that's a good reason to change your vote, but yeah, that's one thing that I have heard. I think it's important just to remember how much support progressive members of Congress have out there. I mean, the base, is so supportive. And so if I were in there and I were getting this kind of pressure or other pressure that I don't know about, that I haven't heard about because I'm not in there yet, I would know that there's millions of people, and the Bernie's campaign showed that, millions of people on the outside who would back me up, and so whatever the threat might be, I would have support.
For them to back you up, you have to communicate with them and tell them what's going on inside the Congress. But one of the things I've noticed is that the squad haven't been telling their supporters what's going on there. They've been playing it actually very close to the vest, and they don't seem to be communicating with their national supporters anyway. But we're all on the receiving end, of their emails, and we never hear about what's going on inside. They won't tell us. In other words, they have decided to simply follow an inside strategy and forget about the outside part, of their strategy, which involves us. They seem to have forgotten that the Not Me, Us movement includes us.
Yeah. I think I like those videos AOC did early on in her first term where she would explain what was going on. And that's something I would want to do, explain how this stuff works. And for example, one thing I saw was, the CPC, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, used to have 2 co-chairs. And then they decided to only have one, and they voted in Pramila Jayapal as that one chair. And they explained the reasoning for that is that during these negotiations, things move extremely quickly. And when they had 2 chairs, they would come up with a response in some negotiation, put out a press release, and then one chair's team would send it to the team of the other chair. Then they would have to look at it, approve it. Hours could go by. And meanwhile, the negotiation has moved on. And so that's why they chose one chair, so that she can act more quickly. That's the kind of inside machinations and how stuff works that I wish they would share more of so we could understand.
Yes, I noticed they did say that, and they also said they were interested in paring down the CPC to a smaller number so that they could have a more cohesive group.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen much of the paring down, though. It's still 96 people, and there are obviously a lot of people who are part of the CPC who we would consider in no way progressive. Hakeem Jeffries, I guess, is the prime example of that. Okay, so I guess my question is, when and how is the paring down going to take place? And has Jayapal succeeded in creating a more cohesive group? The recent events would seem to suggest that maybe she has, if she's telling the truth and can still count on 60 votes in this current conflict, then that would be a very, very formidable group if it was really cohesive. As I recall, the Tea Party, at the height of their strength, only had 40 to 50 people.
Mm-hmm.
So that group of 60 is potentially very strong. And I, with you, am very happy to see that they are still resisting.
Yeah, I think this, more hard line that the progressives have taken and holding to it and saying, no, this is the promise we made, that even Joe Manchin Cinema made, is good. I do also think it might be beneficial to whittle down the Progressive Caucus a bit, because if you can have a member of the New Democrats belong to the Progressive Caucus, then the word progressive doesn't really mean anything. And so whether it's whittling down the Progressive Caucus or maybe just starting another one that may be smaller, only 10 people, but they have more of a core set of, policies that they really support. All 10 of them are, 100% on board for a jobs guarantee to create millions of jobs, including in all of their districts, whether it's a moderate district or a progressive district. The constituents anywhere in any district are going to like it if you bring jobs to their district. And so if you have a smaller caucus that's more committed, maybe that would help, or whittling down the CPC, either one, if the choose the goal.
They seem to have the 10 people now. The 6 people who say they're the squad, okay, also Newman, Jones, Mondaire Jones, and, maybe Jayapal, okay, and the Ro Khanna. That's 10 people right there. And there's supposed to be 4 of those things. So they could have the small group, okay, of 10, but rather than creating that small group of 10, it seems like what Jayapal is trying to do is to create, okay, a larger group that is also cohesive. Okay, and maybe that's the right way to go about it. I don't know that it's not. With respect to your point that, okay, if someone is a member of the Progressive Caucus, and also is a member, okay, of one of the right-wing caucuses, then something is not right there. I think that with Hakeem Jeffries, that is certainly true. But on the other hand, there's also Debbie Dingell. She's a member of the CPC, and she's a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus also. I don't know, but I don't really doubt the sincerity, okay, of Debbie Dingell when it comes to Medicare for all. That's in her family DNA, and I don't see her stepping back from that at all. I've even thought that when Pelosi leaves, it might be a good thing for us to have her as the Speaker of the House, because there are certainly not enough votes to put someone who's easily identifiable as a progressive in that kind of position. The best we could probably hope for is to have someone who's much more friendly to a progressive agenda. And it seemed to me that, she might be that person. There are other candidates who also could be that person, such as a Rosa DeLauro or Jan Schakowsky, Karen Bass, a few others like that, who might actually be much more friendly to the CPC, okay, in general. It doesn't seem to me Jayapal is really a possibility. I'm not sure Barbara Lee, okay, is a possibility, but you should probably be thinking over these things, okay, a little bit, because if you do get in 2022, then you're going to have a clear idea about who you would like to support as the new Speaker of the House. Because certainly Pelosi has to go, From time to time, I've been suggesting that they do a vacate the chair maneuver on her, actually right now. Well, that would be hard to do, but at the same time, the CPC is an official party caucus. So they could make such a motion, and they would have to get a vote within, I think it's something like 3 business days, the rules say.
Yeah, maybe they. I didn't know about that, but that sounds like a good option. I think I would support Pramila Jayapal because she supports the major policies that I do. She's shown that she can whip votes and create a strategy and get a block of people to stand firm around a position. So I don't know. Yeah, I think she would be a great person to support for that.
She'd be a great person to support, but on the other hand, she'd probably be nowhere near getting a majority of votes in the caucus. She'd probably just be really unacceptable to the right wing of the caucus, which means they would have enough votes to block her, to continuously block her, if she was on the floor. It's the same thing as the Pelosi situation now, okay, but in reverse. So it seems to me it's going to have to be some compromise choice, and that it would really be good if we could evaluate the personalities involved and see, who would give the progressives an honest hearing, and someone who would not constantly be looking to the donors to see whether there was a veto coming from the donors. And there's Laura. It would be great if she would be bold enough to endorse you. Yes, it would be great if she would to endorse you, Rebecca.
Pramila Jayapal, if you're watching this, please. Yeah.
I'm not sure she's bold enough to endorse anybody, though. She seems to have been studiously avoiding that. Okay, it looks like we've gotten, a lot of good comments. Okay, I think we should probably go over the comments soon, but for now, have you any other part of your platform that you would like us to feature for us?
We spoke about housing, but if people are interested in my full housing policy, it's too long to go on my website. So you can email the campaign at contact@rebeccaforwa.com, and I'll send you the document. It includes stuff that would make housing available at a price people can actually afford, whether you're currently homeless or renting or a homeowner, but or looking and you can't find what you need in a city like Tacoma, or in a small town like Port Townsend, Port Angeles, Aberdeen in my district, or the rural areas. It would really make housing available for everyone who needs it, and create millions of jobs in the process. And we have done these really big, bold policies before. We had a very bold housing program during World War II, for example. So there's precedent for doing these bold housing policies, and just email the campaign if you want the full thing, and I'd be happy to talk about it.
There's a pretty good statement on housing that's on your website.
Yeah, you can go there too.
Yeah, I'm sharing that now, actually. Let's see. Can you see it? Yeah, I think you can see part of it, but
I can. Yeah, part of it.
Right. So it says our housing system is broken. That's why I've been to the ground doing community organizing, including occupying empty buildings to get more housing for homeless people in Tacoma. Okay, in Aberdeen, population 16,000, 1,000 people are homeless. In our districts, I guess that's the majority. Minority neighborhoods, such as the Hilltop in Tacoma, people of color and the poor are being driven out by gentrification. Task forces have been convened and politicians have wrung their hands, but precious little has been done to stem the tide of long-time hilltop residents leaving their homes. We must act decisively to protect our neighborhoods and their rich cultural heritage. In Congress, I will fight for universal rent control nationwide. Boy, nobody talks about that anymore at all, Rebecca.
They don't, and we've had rent control, federal rent control in this country before, so it's not some wild policy I'm creating out of thin air. There's precedent, and
Right.
It would be done at a reasonable rate.
As a matter of fact, I can attest to that because when I was a kid, I lived in a rent control apartment, in New York City, in the Bronx, and we moved in when I was 5, and the rent was something like $68 a month by then. And when the family moved out, which was roughly when I was 20 or 21, the rent had gone up to $85 a month. So that was rent control. That was really rent control.
Yeah.
So landlords.
Also, rent control, just so people know, doesn't mean a cap. Like nobody can ever pay more than this fixed amount. It's a percentage at which rent can rise every year.
Yes.
So it's saying you can't just, triple the rent from one year to the next. There are reasonable rates at which you can increase it, but it's not like everybody is going to pay this amount. It's a reasonable, increased amount every year that it can be raised.
Right. And then you want just cause for eviction, so tenants' stability and sometimes our very lives can't be threatened by the whims of a landlord.
Yeah, so the landlord can evict you because they just don't like you, or they don't like your politics, or there's some local housing law they're trying to circumvent, so they come up with some excuse to evict you so that they can do the thing they want to do. For example, during the eviction moratorium, and there was an eviction moratorium at the state level in Washington State, landlords found loopholes to get around it, and so we need just cause for eviction.
Right. And a national grace period of 14 days for payment of rent. So being as little as $100 short on rent doesn't jumpstart someone into homelessness. It's much easier to keep someone out of homelessness than to get them out of it. The Declaration of Housing is a human right. It seems to me that was already declared by FDR in 1944. But a massive investment in public housing and anti-gentrification community land trusts, so housing always stays affordable and community controlled. Do you want to say a little more about that bullet point?
Yeah, investment in public housing and community land trusts, both are really important. One statistic that I like to tell people about is that for every one homeless person in this country, there are 28 empty homes. And that's homes. Also, there are empty buildings that are not classified as homes right now. For example, the first building that we occupied as Tacoma Housing now is a middle school that had been empty for over a decade. It's not an empty home right now, but it could be turned into a home and house a lot of people. And so that could be building new housing, but mostly, but for example, like in Berlin, buying housing and turning it into public housing or social housing, and having it be mixed income. And there are places where this has worked really well, like in Vienna. So that would be one part of it. And then a community land trust is where there's a piece of land that is owned by the community, represented by a board of community members, and they create a contract for how the land can be used, what can be built on it, and so that allows the community to control how it's used instead of having, out of state wealthy developers come in and put up a really expensive high rise or something like that. Then the community can decide what's done with that land, and so it can be a really powerful tool against gentrification and for keeping people in their neighborhoods, especially majority minority neighborhoods.
Okay, very good. I'd like to go a little more into the environment category here. and just take a look at your issues statement there for a minute. Climate change is now. Water resources are disappearing. Farms are flooding. Crop yields are declining. We have until 2030 to stem further catastrophic climate change. If we do nothing, the planet will heat up to 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this century. Yes. While just 100 companies are responsible for 70% of global emissions, it's the 99% of us who suffer the consequences. And communities of color and poor communities are hit the hardest. Where do you go if you're poor and the river flooding in Aberdeen causes sewage to back up around your home? What do you do if your kid has asthma and can't breathe when wildfires choke the air in Tacoma, but you can't afford to leave the town during the summer? But what do you do if you're a member of the Quinault Indian Nation and you're watching the glaciers your ancestors walked on disappeared, and you have to relocate from your village and its sacred ground because of rising sea levels? This is a crisis of massive proportions, and only bold solutions will solve it. Incrementalism has failed in Congress. I will fight for the Green New Deal to transition our economy 100% renewable energy by 2030. Now that is probably the most bold goal that I've seen stated by any congressional candidate. As yet. Have you seen anybody else who's advocated for a quicker transition than 2030?
It might be there, but I haven't seen it.
Yes, I haven't seen it either. And based on the science, we certainly must have that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're the only one who's advocating for it now.
Yeah, I just don't understand why we're not all running around like chickens with our heads cut off. I mean, it's, back when I first was considering running, 3-4 years ago, and it was like, I just felt, a federal position made the most sense because of climate. There's only... the federal government has trillions of dollars at its disposal, and the policies that are made at the federal level obviously affect the country, but also the entire world. And it's an existential threat. If we don't fix this, everything else would just become moot. And
it's an existential threat, and the federal government doesn't have any financial limitations. It's a monetarily sovereign government.
Mm-hmm.
It can spend as much as it has to spend to take care of this existential crisis. So this does have to be a federal program. How can you make this happen, but should you get into Congress? And, okay, I'm going to ask you a second question. Which may not seem to be related to the first question, but I think it may be. How is it that Sarah Smith wasn't able to be successful against Adam Smith in 2018?
Well, first, in terms of how to do it, I would say, while I said earlier that I like the Green New Deal means a lot of different things because I can define it, that also means I think there's a definition that I want to push for. And so one of the issues right now with the Green New Deal is that it's a resolution and it's not very specific. The congressional resolution is not very specific. Yes. So one thing, I would do is maybe there's increasingly, progressive and left-wing think tanks in DC working on these things. I would work with them, work with staffers to actually create a Green New Deal bill. And, sometimes these big policies don't all go through as one bill. They go through as a whole host of different bills and amendments here, but at least you can put forward one big, this is a Green New Deal bill. This is what we should be fighting for, to at least have something to introduce and try to get through committee. And I know it's a big lift. I would only be one person out of 435 in Congress in the House.
That's right. You would not be the committee chair, even if you get onto the Energy and Commerce Committee. But you would not be the committee chair. Okay. How do you fight that?
Try to get support from either this newer, smaller, idea of a caucus we were talking about, or from the Progressive Caucus. I think at least having a bill that has specific policies in it, and then making alliances with people who could push for those in the various committees that they're on. A lot of stuff in Congress works on relationships and people who have known each other for years or decades. And we come in as a new person. I think it's a good idea to make allies where you can. And maybe that's a way things can get through. I spoke with one former member of the House who said that, for all the flaws and frustrations, one thing they were really proud of was getting a amendment into a bill that wasn't theirs, and the amendment didn't have their name on it, so they didn't get any credit for it, but it saved tens of thousands of lives. And I'd be fine with taking that kind of approach, and whatever it takes, the approach like Bernie, the Amendment King, that kind of thing. But at least having a basis to start from, like, this is the Green New Deal that I'm actually fighting for. Yes. And then why Sarah Smith couldn't win, I'm not, I did volunteer for her campaign, but mostly I was an outsider. I wasn't on staff or anything. And I think her budget.
She was running a pretty good campaign, wasn't she?
Yeah. And she, it was also a lot harder than 2018. This was the kind of first wave, and AOC hadn't won yet. And there wasn't this kind of big insurgency trying to unseat centrists at that time yet. And Sarah Smith, had a pretty small budget. I also had a pretty small budget last time, so it's not a criticism, but it's just, when you're going against somebody who has millions of dollars and they can spend on absolutely everything they need, money is important. We don't like to talk about it. And she did get through, just like Jeffrey said, she got through the primary. Yeah, and for people who aren't aware.
Yes, I know. She got into the finals.
Yeah, which was great because we have a top 2 primary where everybody's running against everybody else, like California. It's also called a bundle primary. So, for there to be 2 Democrats running against each other in the general, that was quite an achievement.
I thought that was a very good achievement, on her part. But you have to do the same this time to get into the finals, in order to have a shot at beating Adam Smith. When you do get into the Congress, let's assume that you've beaten Adam Smith and you've gotten into the Congress, then and you're part of the CPC and part of the squad perhaps, and you're in a situation where you're negotiating with someone who wants to be the new speaker. Let's assume the following scenario. Nancy Pelosi goes back on her word, and she still wants to be the speaker. And a group of the progressives say, no, you promised, but you would get out. And we have the votes to stop you, and we're going to do it. And they do. They stick to it. And they block her. And 6 rounds pass. And she finally sees that she can't stay as speaker any longer. Then successors start to step forward. And the CPC will want to negotiate with the successor to create the best deal for the progressives, and the best deal for the House. To make it a more effective instrument, what would you negotiate for?
And this is in terms of the speaker. So, like, what would I want from the speaker? Like, what commitments from them?
Yeah, let's say the candidates were Jen Schakowsky and Rosa DeLauro and Debbie Dingle and Karen Bass, but maybe Barbara Lee. So those were the 5 possible successors that people were considering. And Hakeem Jeffries, of course, he would throw his hat in the ring too. So you have, again, maybe 60 CPC members who are sticking together. And they're capable of blocking any speaker candidate. So if someone wants to get in, they have to get the 60 or 50 or 40 votes, or whatever it's going to be, from the CPC, okay, at that time. Then what would you negotiate for?
I would want the speaker to commit publicly in the media to introducing, putting the Medicare for All bill up for a vote, and committing to really, passing it through. Putting, let's see, this would be early in the process, so there wouldn't be, I wouldn't have written, like a housing bill I wanted or something like that. But so I would say Medicare for All, it's a bill that's already written. It's there. It's ready to go through. That's what I would say. And then a commitment from them to get a bill through as well that ends fossil fuels and gets us to renewables by 2030. And since there isn't a bill for that that I've seen, unless I'm mistaken, then we just have a commitment, that particular policy.
How about a framework that's more fundamental than that? Okay, let's say some list of floor votes to ask for, some list, okay, of rule changes, okay, that had to be made. For example, getting rid of the pay-go rule, no more pay-go rule, okay, and a commitment to put on the floor of the House a new law repealing the national law that exists now with respect to pay-go that was passed by the Obama administration. In other words, getting rid of the House rule, okay, and getting rid of the law. Okay. How about also a rule change in the House such that if someone introduces a bill and it has a certain number of co-sponsors, then it automatically gets a floor vote within a specific period of time. Well, let's say 10 days or something like that, something reasonable. Mm-hmm. What would a rule like that do to the House?
That would force the House to stop just putting out these messaging bills where people can put their name on as a co-sponsor and then do everything they can behind the scenes to prevent it from actually ever going forward. So they can say, look, I'm a progressive, but then to their donors, and the private fundraisers, oh, don't worry. I'm not going to let that actually go through. That's a great idea that I hadn't considered.
Yeah, it seems to me it would have another impact as well. Okay, and that is it would reduce the power, okay, of the committee chairs and reduce the power of the seniority system in Congress. Yeah, because people could get a floor vote. They could draw up some legislation like, for example, the ABC Act, the Automatic Boost to Communities Act. But that was introduced by Rashida and also Jayapal. Okay, and that had it was going to be funded by $2 trillion coins, okay, as well. So, of course, that bill is a dead letter, but it probably would have been possible to get 20 to 30 co-sponsors of that bill in the House, real co-sponsors. So then
Hashtag mint the coin.
Yeah, well, I'm a very big supporter of minting the coin. I've written the only book on the subject, okay, is yet.
Yeah.
Okay. No, but anyway, completely apart, okay, from that, and it's the president's role to mint the coin, actually, right now. The congressional part of that is done. Okay. And, so the president can do it right now. Tomorrow, he could order the minting of $100 trillion coin, and he should, because that would end all debt ceiling crises for the foreseeable future. But that's a separate issue. Okay. The issue I'm talking about here is that all kinds of legislation, but from progressives and from conservatives, would have to be brought forward for floor votes then. It would be a much more dynamic situation inside of the House, and the backbenchers would have a lot more influence, okay, than they have now. That's important to you and your constituents. In other words, your constituents are electing you to have a say in what goes on, at the national level, and the way the system in the House is structured now. You can't really have a role in that.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, your role in the governing is purely symbolic for a number of terms, until you get a share of power. That's not what your constituents are voting for. That's not what they should have to tolerate. And a rule change like this would stop that. Okay, I can think of some other rules too, but then also there are committee assignments. In other words, the next thing would be with any speaker that, you negotiate for important committee assignments as well. So a list of the floor votes, the rule changes, okay, I've mentioned, and also committee assignments. That's a little bit, okay, of a negotiating framework to go in with when something is sure to happen on January 3rd of 2023, when the House convenes again and the speakership comes up for voting again. It's important to go in with a negotiating framework, especially in 2023 when Nancy Pelosi is not supposed to be a candidate again, theoretically. Okay, I don't trust her at all, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, committee seats is an important one. I think a combination, specific policies that may not be in bills yet, actual bills, rules changes, and committee assignments would all make a big difference.
They would make a big difference. So I guess it would be important if you and some of the others would go in with ideas for a program like that and try to negotiate such a program with the speaker candidate that is going to get the deciding votes. And I suspect CPC will be supplying the deciding votes in that instance. Okay, let's turn to the comments now.
I do have to go in about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. And let's see if we can get some really important comments. Okay, I'll continue on with other comments, actually. But let me see if I can get to some really important ones. So Laura said, yes, Rebecca, that is a fantastic idea. They can band together and fundraise / back a primary challenger. That's the kind of bold action we hope to see the elected progressives take. I can't exactly recall the context of that comment, but it seems to me to be a very important one. Can you recall it?
No. If Laura's still here in the comments, maybe she'll add it.
Yeah, I think she is still here. I noticed that later also.
And Jeffrey made comments a couple times that what bothers him is that people keep from listening. We'll look at that big bad boogeyman Joe Manchin routine instead of looking at all the people in Congress who take unlimited super PAC money, as if Manchin and Sinema are the only ones controlled by dark money. And that's very true. I think there's this concept of the rotating villain in politics where you just have this villain and you heap all the blame on them, and that's why you can't get stuff done. And then, you know, maybe later you choose another villain, but it's always if you're not in power and you're Democrats or Republicans, if you are in power, it's Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. I mean, it just it's ridiculous, and it does cover up the debate. Kind of lets us avert our gaze from the entire system being corrupt from top to bottom.
Yes, and all that is true, but in the short run and in the context at present, it does seem that Manchin and Sinema are the two people who are standing in the way of the 3.5T bill. So what Laura said actually right after Jeff is, I mean, this guy is despicable. He is literally negotiating for the donor class and co-sponsoring the ongoing murder for profit. And by the way, his family is getting rich off this too. His whole family. I mean, all this.
Joe Manchin is a literal coal baron. I mean,
yes, he's a coal baron, but of course, his daughter was the EpiPen girl, and he cashed out of that for a considerable amount. And
the parliamentarian.
And she cheated to get into the company also because she claimed she had a business degree and she was lying on her resume. And so that's what got her into the position in the first place. That, of course, and Joe Manchin's influence. So, there was the influence peddling there. And then the EpiPen was also so successful as a commercial product because his wife, who was on various kinds of education committees in the state, did deals to get business for the EpiPen manufacturer, whose chief executive officer was her daughter. So this was an incredible display of family corruption in West Virginia over this period.
Nepotism.
Yeah, so Laura says 1.5T literally means the difference of human lives. Some will live or die based on this negotiation, quote unquote. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And Lisa says, just say no. And she says, hi, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember. It was 25 years ago when El Nino was really strong and everybody was talking about it. And it was like you could blame everything on El Nino, like, oh, I forgot to get the Cheerios when I went to the grocery store. It's El Nino's fault. And now they're just using that like the parliamentarian. I was going to go to the gym, but the parliamentarian said that I can't, just can't work out today, and I can't pass Medicare for all of it,
Yeah.
It's like the political El Nino.
Okay, so it sort of seems like your 5 minutes are probably up or so at about this point.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Okay, sure.
And the great questions. They're very good questions.
Yeah, sure. I had a very good time. The conversation was a great one. And I hope you'll come on again in not too long a time. So I guess I'll say that until next time, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Bye, buddy.
Thank you very much for being so open.
Of course.
I really like that.
Yeah.
So good night.
Good night. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, bye. All right. So here we are. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the comments and take all your comments, okay, as usual. I think she certainly was great. And I think she's a wonderful candidate, and she's a real fighter. She strikes me as a real fighter. full of P and V, as we used to say in the old days. I'm not going to translate that for you. Bonnie's laughing there in the background. And Laura says, thank you, Rebecca. We really appreciate all of your community building and direct action, and also your belief in organizing a solidarity, multi-pronged approach. Yeah, I really like that too. And Jeff Denton says, except for Bernie introduced $15 an hour legislation in 2015 and campaigned on it, and the result was that dozens of cities around the country adopted it 6 years ago. Absolutely, Jeff, you're entirely right. Now they have to pass things that are higher than $15 an hour, because in many of those cities, $15 an hour is no longer a living wage, and may not have been even in 2015. Greg said, you see where Bernie sees properties from mega landlords, where Germany, sorry, not Bernie, Germany sees properties from mega landlords. Those homes have been nationalized and turned into public housing. Kay says, yes, Germany is doing the right thing, Greg Mallard. And Greg says, implement a federal job guarantee and abolish the Phillips curve Nehru standpoints. Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. Laura says, shared YouTube Live in a link in a new tweet. Please, everyone, consider sharing the YouTube link to any and all platforms you're on. Thank you, hashtag FOAF, which means fighting on all fronts or fight on all fronts. And by the way, I didn't ask you to please share, like, and subscribe. Obviously, I should have asked you to please share, like, and subscribe. Yes, I never could get to Reef this afternoon. I was too preoccupied with various things that were happening, including Laura's surprise reading of the preface to my book, Fixing the Debt, and a chapter 1 as well. She did 2 live streams, one reading the preface and the next chapter 1, okay, of the book. And she did do a wonderful job at that reading. Thank you, Laura. Jeff Denton says, talking about a Green New Deal, that including the male cannabis plant known as hemp, is like talking about economic reform without talking about MMT. This is why the owners of the government have to control all of the media. Yes. And somehow they manage to control all the media without actually owning it, right? And Kay says, ban RTW states. I guess I'm missing what RTW states stand for, but I'm sure you'll tell me, Kay. Shane says, what do you think about the Howie Hawkins Green New Deal versus the Bernie Sanders Green New Deal versus Warren's plan versus the Aoc Market Plan versus Steyer's plan? Well, that was quite a question. I'm sorry I didn't get to that question, okay, a little earlier, but based on what Rebecca said, obviously she prefers the Howie Hawkins Green New Deal. That's the only one that's anywhere near her aspirations, what she wants to see. Greg says, where do you stand on nationalizing our healthcare system? Sorry, I didn't get a chance to ask her that question. Perhaps next time. Medicare for All program, but that's not nationalizing our healthcare system. That's only nationalizing our health insurance system, and not even that completely. So that distinction is an important distinction, and I would have liked to have asked her that particular question. But I'm not sure asking her that particular question and getting an answer on it would help her campaign. I am sure that her position, okay, on Medicare for All would help that campaign. Would help her campaign. Jeffrey says hemp, ethanol, and hydrogen fuel are abundantly renewable and clean burning. Well, they're still putting CO2 in the air, aren't they? I know they put a lot less CO2 in the air than the stuff we're using now, but I thought that the most important thing that hemp can do is sequestering lots of carbon in the soil. That it's really wonderful for that. And I'd say that's maybe more important than its use for fuel. Kay says, Roe kind of said if we need to cut it back, we should cut it to 4 years and then run on keeping it. Yeah, I think that's certainly reasonable, that it should be, if it were to be cut back to 4 years. Yeah, and then we could run on keeping it. Yeah. That might be a very good thing to do as a matter of politics. It's something the Democrats could then continuously run on until, they get a chance to make it permanent. Laura says, yes, they need to get out in front and stop playing defense or counterpoint to Manchin and Sinema. I completely agree. Jeff says, what bothers me is that people keep falling for the same old look at that big, bad boogeyman Joe Manchin routine, instead of looking at all of the people in Congress take unlimited Citizens United Super PAC money as if Manchin and Sinema are the only ones controlled by dark money. Well, you know what I think about that, Jeff? Okay, what I think is that, and I didn't get a chance to say this, but to Rebecca, but I think Congress should be passing new campaign finance bills that use Article 3, the Section 2 of the Constitution to strip the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court so that it's not able to review the campaign finance laws that Congress passes, because they've proven themselves to have a very, very strong corporate bias with respect to their decisions when it comes to campaign finance laws and when it comes to voting rights. And we cannot trust them to do an honest job of judging those areas. So they need to be stripped of jurisdiction. And Laura Fielding says, I mean, this guy is despicable. He's literally, we went over that comment before. And Laura says, restricting AOC area to include more pro-Israel voters. Yeah, they'll probably try to do that, but it may not be so easy for them to do it. Laura says, bingo, Joe. And Jeff says, yeah, well, it's either always the so-called progressives' fault or the people that they want to hold up as an example. So everyone focuses. Oh, by the way, I have to mention, though, with respect to the AOC redistricting, that redistricting is going to be done by the state legislature, in New York. And I haven't noticed that Nancy Pelosi has a great deal of influence when it comes to the state legislature, in New York. And I'm not sure that they could get AOC redistricted there. And maybe they can, but I'm seeing a much more progressive state legislature in New York than we have seen, in many years. And with Andrew Cuomo gone, it's a new day, in New York, and we don't know how that's going to work out yet. But it's a more favorable situation for AOC than has existed there for a long time when it comes to redistricting. Yeah, well, it's either always the so-called the progressives' fault or the people they want to hold up as an example so that everyone focuses on just one or two instead of an entire bought and paid for, no matter who, Congress, and cabinet. Jeff, I do think that that's true and that you're completely right. You're completely right about that. But when it comes to making change, we have to focus on the people where we have an ability to make change. Yeah, there are people in all kinds of heavily red Republican districts who are totally bought by the donors. But there's really no place for progressives to hold influence in those particular districts. In other words, we have to evaluate and try to strengthen those districts where progressives do have influence. And we have to try to strengthen the way the progressives that have been elected actually behave. I mean, what other choice do we have? Now, one thing we could do is we could go into Hakeem Jeffries' district, get somebody to challenge him, nationalize that thing, and get him the hell out of Congress. That would be a wonderful thing to do. A wonderful thing to do. Laura says solidarity and communication is a two-way street. It certainly is. And the progressives have not been doing very much of that. Dennis Kucinich district was redrawn for not but towing the line. Well, yes, but the most important thing to remember there was that his district was redrawn in the first place because Ohio lost congressional seats. Why did Ohio lose congressional congressional districts? Because Obama failed to deliver in 2010. Maybe if Kucinich had been stronger and other progressives like him had been stronger in 2010 and insisted on either voting for Medicare for all or not voting for healthcare reform at all, and maybe had they been successful in getting H.R. 676 passed in Ohio, maybe the Democrats wouldn't have lost any districts in Ohio. In other words, the Democrats lost districts in certain states, and they failed to win in certain states because of their terrible performance in 2009 and 2010. That is when they really had control, of Congress. It wasn't 50-50. They came into the Senate with 58 seats. At certain times in 2009 and 2010, as you know, they actually got up to 60 seats inside the Senate. They had a margin of something like 45 to 50 seats in Pelosi's House of Representatives. She could get anything she wanted done. The conservatives didn't have enough people to stop her. Lisa says, we need them to be abstinent children. Dig in your heels. No, we need them to be obstinate adults and to recognize if they don't dig in their heels and use their power, they will continue to be served with bowls of crap to visualize what Nina Turner said. That's why they get those bowls of crap, because they won't say no. As Lisa said, just say no. Keep saying no until you get what you want. NK says, that is, the GOP ruined Ohio to Laura's Pierce. Ohio sucks bad. And Laura says, yes, and they work and communicate together to pick their battles and leverage their votes. Yes, well, maybe that when they're all getting together to conspire against the American people about another phony deficit debate, they can work out how they're going to fake vote on this fake democracy, for fuck's sake. And Lisa Theobald says, oh my God, I'm asking permission. Kay says, Kucinich was a great mayor of Cleveland years ago. He was. The boy mayor. Laugh out loud. Cleveland was a great city back then. Now Cleveland is one of the poorest cities in the country. Yeah. That might have not been the case if Dennis had remained the mayor of Cleveland all these years, but at some point he had to try to step up. And while he was in the Congress, he was influential beyond the influence he should have had. Costart says, surfs up. Laura Fielding said it would be great if she would be bold enough to endorse you. Yes, we discussed that. Jeff says, maybe if the right-wing caucus knew Jayapal won't even endorse her own state single-payer healthcare trust, they'd be more willing to work with her. Good point, Jeff. Laura says, Rep. Jayapal, please endorse Rebecca Parson. She supports H.R. 1976 for national, improved Medicare for all, and much more. Yeah, she'd probably support the ABC Act, too. I didn't ask her if she'd support the ABC Act, but she probably would. And Ghost Dot says, Tracy put the L in Fred Hampton leftists, FHL, hashtags exit stage. I'm sorry, Steve, I'm not familiar with Tracy. Did she get kicked out of the FHL? And Carmen says, that fair market allowance that landlords are privileged to is neoliberal entitlement. Absolutely true. Okay, says, no more selling public low-income housing to corporations either. Carmen says, Berlin, less having to pay rent allows more taxes for social safety nets like free health care. Laura says, this is a really excellent interview, Joe. Thank you for asking such great questions and really highlighting the excellence of Rebecca Parson and a platform. Thank you to you, Rebecca, for running and for all the community organizing you do. Dostart says, hashtag Day of the Dead, October 30th, hashtag Nancy Pelosi's house, hashtag M4M for all is holding a vigil and rally to honor every person who has died in this country due to a lack of health care. And Carmen Yuna says, atta girl, Rebecca. Laura Fielding says, not leave such strongly antagonistic comments, but Representative Jayapal endorsed the corrupt incumbent by Representative Adam Smith. These are the types of failures which makes people like me feel very skeptical. People like me, too. I feel very skeptical against Jayapal. I mean, it really wouldn't have hurt her position if she were to endorse Rebecca Parson. She's the head of the CPC, goddammit. She can endorse people who are opposed to progressive values. We expect her to do that. If Nancy Pelosi doesn't like it, she can go F herself. That's the way I feel about that. Jeff Denton says, Sarah Smith actually made it through the primaries and beat the Republican for second place. She did. But Adam Smith is owned by the military-industrial complex, for crying out loud. I know. Lisa 925 says, thank you, Rebecca. You're a fighter for the people. I got that impression from her. I did get that impression for her, that she's spoiling for a fight for the people. We should make her that mean, that she's spoiling for a fight for the people. Kay says, I like Rebecca Parson, and I would vote for her. Well, you know, she's not the only good one. There's also Jason Call in the WA-02. And there's also Stephanie Gallardo. I think you've endorsed her, Laura Fielding, haven't you? And Laura says, we can't peel away 40 to 60 votes. It's an excellent question that should definitely be well considered. But going back to what Rebecca said, the CPC needs to be greatly reduced in number to include actual progressives and or a new caucus must be formed. Yeah, I agree. That was supposedly what the CPC was going to do, that when it agreed that Jayapal would be the sole chair. Also, supposedly, one of the purposes of this was to allow her to consolidate the CPC, I suppose, through getting the CPC to support policies and then demanding that everybody in the CPC support those particular policies. And if they fail to support them, then that would be grounds for ejection from the CPC. That would certainly be a good way. That would certainly be a good way of getting rid of Hakeem Jeffries. Who wants to have Hakeem Jeffries in the mix in the CPC so he can, right to work for less. Thank you, Kay. so that he can report back to Nancy Pelosi on CPC stuff. Okay, so let's see, where was I? Yeah, here I was. Peel back 40 to 60 votes, yeah. Kay says we need younger progressives in the government. Laura Fielding says Manchin, Cinema. Kay says young people will bring the change needed. Nancy Gosling Blackar. Hi, Nancy Blackmar. Hi, Nancy. Great job, Rebecca and Dr. Joe. You've already got my vote. And Lisa P925 says, don't forget the parliamentarian. I will never forget the parliamentarian. I believe Ryan Grimm made a good case for firing the parliamentarian. So now I agree the parliamentarian should be fired. Carmen says Steve Donziger got sent to jail for 6 months. Yes, he did, which was excessive, but he's appealing it. He's appealing the sentence. And I think he's going to appeal the whole case. And Lisa P925 left the peace sign, the heart sign, and another sign that I cannot read in this interface. But thank you very much, Lisa. Bonnie says she was great. Yeah, you thought she was great, right? Yeah, I liked her too. I really liked her. And I liked Jason Cole too. So 2 out of the 3 progressives running look very, very good. By the way, if we could somehow get all 3 in office in Washington, then assuming we can still consider Jaya Powell to be a progressive, we'd actually have 4 progressives in the congressional delegation in Washington. That's terrific. Laura Fielding says, full of piss and vinegar. We know, Joe, we know. And Carmen says, is P and V one of Joe's recipes, Bonnie? Laugh out loud. Kay says, laugh out loud. P and V equals piss and vinegar. Laura says, it was my pleasure, Joe. I look forward to reading chapter 2 and possibly 3 tomorrow on Red Beret's Medicare for All YouTube channel. If you do that, I will certainly tune in. Least I could do to return this solidarity you are extending. Well, thank you, Laura. Kay says, right to work, great to work for less. I read that before. Lisa P25 says, Stein/Baraka should have been president/VP and reelected 2020, if only. Yeah, it's not the time when people are going to abandon the major parties, though. Not yet. They just take all the crap and they take it again, they take it again, they take it again, and they just don't see that what they need to do is en masse, they have to desert these lousy parties and end them. They both deserve to die. That's the truth. And Lisa says, the electoral system in U.S. is broken as far as the people are concerned. Okay. Actually, Lisa P925 says that. And Laura Fielding says, I learned so much from you every time I watch Joe. Thank you, Laura. On Friday, Portugal ended nearly all of its coronavirus restrictions. I don't know what to say about that. There are a number of countries ending all restrictions. Singapore is doing the same thing. The pandemic has not ended yet. They are condemning people to debt. New Zealand hasn't done that. Last time I looked, they still had only 5 fatalities per million. That is responsible government, okay, in my view. There is no penalty that they have paid so far that weighs more heavily than the fact that they've only lost 5 people per million. They've done the right thing, and their people are still alive, and life is normal there. Life is normal too. It's normal because of what they do whenever the virus rears its ugly head. They immediately strangle it. And because they've done that, they can live a normal life. So you can strangle it and you can live a normal life. And Lana says, I was half hoping the redistricting would oust AOC altogether. This way, the hate cult could focus on someone else, and she might be able to do a restart running next time for a Senate seat comes up in New York. No, that would not work, Lana. She's got to hold on to her district, okay, until there's change in New York State sufficient to elect her as a senator. We really need her, okay, to do that. She has great promise as a politician. I still think that her heart, okay, is in the right place. And I'm still in her corner. I may criticize her a lot. I'll probably continue to do that. But basically, if I were in her district, okay, and they ran a Republican against her, or they ran a corporatist in a primary against her, if I were in her district, my old district that I grew up in, I would still vote for her. Dostat says 3.5 trillion over 10 years equals 350 billion per year. The population of the U.S. is 329.5 million. So the big, scary socialist spending bill proposes to spend a little over 1,000 person per year. Big, scary bill. Yeah, I know that's baloney. It's baloney. It's absolutely baloney. It should have been $6.5 trillion every year for 10 years. That's what it should have been. Kay says, Laura, I've been learning from Joe for a couple of years or more now. Carmen says, Democrats get served bowls of crap and say, please, sir, may I have another? Laura says, damn it, Joe, you're on fire. God damn it. Well, a lot of times I'm on fire. I think that's why Bonnie married me. Yay. And she said, yay. And Laura says, yes, I have endorsed Stephanie Gallardo, yes. So shall I interview Stephanie also? I've been considering it. Ghost says, AOC equals apologist of crumbs. Yeah. And Ghostat says they're not going to release Stephen Donziger upon appeal. How do you know? How do you know? And Carmen says, refreshing candidate Rebecca is. Laura says, I want to thank this community, your longstanding participants, Joe, for welcoming me and the addition of this, the Red Berets #FOF program that you are knitting into your schedule. Laura, I'm doing more than knitting it into my schedule. Oh, by the way, for next week, I have but Nurse Mana coming on Saturday. I have Jeff Epstein coming on Tuesday for a Mint the Coin talk with me. I'm going to be approaching two other people for Red Beret series conversations next week for Wednesday and also Thursday. So I just want you to know that. Lana says, Rebecca seems like a great candidate. Shane says, Lana, I'm going to give you a call after the stream. I have some amazing, amusing news for you. I think you'll appreciate it. Yeah, I got that news already, Lana. You are going to appreciate this. Shane says, love Rebecca. Carmen says, why is Portugal doing that? The R1 variant is catching on. People have had it with COVID. They've had it with it. They just don't want to try to contain it anymore. They're aggressively giving up on it, and the representatives are aggressively giving up on containing it because they don't want to pay the containment price. Even though the containment price would probably be, it would just mean a month of a really tough time, they just won't pay that price and then take the price of further attempts to contain it. They've gotten to the point where they're willing to take the losses. There could be, I'm not saying this is going to happen, there could be hundreds of thousands more deaths here in the United States before it's over. And our politicians are willing to accept that. Apparently. Both Democratic politicians and Republican politicians. Of course, the Republican politicians are a little worse, but it's people in both parties who are doing that. Shane says, I don't think AOC has the political instincts to win a Senate seat anymore. I'd hate to be right, but she's changed. But maybe I'm wrong, but maybe not. I think she's entered a period of confusion because she's buckled under and made some compromises, which she didn't think very much of herself for making up, for making the compromises. I think what she's trying to do is get in touch with her real identity again. And I expect to see her coming back. Okay, I really do. I mean, we still forget she's a kid. What is she, 30 years old now? Something like that. She's a kid. She's got to find herself again. She's got to get in touch with who she is. The other members of the squad are all older and more mature, okay, and better grounded. Cori Bush, for example, is certainly Ilhan Omar, okay, and Rashida, Ayanna Pressley. They are much more mature people. And Rashida is tough as nails. By the way, I think Omar is tough as nails also.
Yeah.
So I think the youngest and impressionable of them, okay, was AOC. And she's having the most trouble in staying solid. I think she'll be back, though. Carmen says, Joe is hulking a little bit tonight. And Lana says, ha ha, the fire in Firestone. Laura Fielding says, that's very exciting. And Shane says, Joe, I think you should interview Joe DeSouza. He's running for high office, just a city council seat in Astoria. But I had an hour conversation with him on the phone today. He's really cool. It's going to be hard to do that for a while, Shane, because I'm devoting a lot of time to the Red Beret series. I've got really only one free period a week, and there are always very important things to talk about, okay, in that period. And I just don't think I'm going to have time to interview Joe DeSouza. I mean, I've got only 4 programs a week. So I have to be careful with those particular choices. And I'm definitely going to work the Red Beret series until I've gotten the measure of that whole movement. And after that, okay, is over. In other words, once this first round is over, then I'll pare down to maybe 2 programs a week, okay, on the Red Beret series, with more people in each program, okay? Then I'll finally pare down to 1 program, okay, on the Red Beret series. Those will be mostly panel shows, and they will be once a week, and they will be for the purpose of keeping in touch with the movement as we move along. One thing that's happened to me over the last 4 months is that I have become a Red Beret, and I'm keeping in touch with the movement at least once a week through my live streams for the foreseeable future. That's what I'm doing. So you heard it here first. Steve Donziger said they're not. Well, Steve Donziger may know, and maybe that's what's going to happen to him. He knows better than I. If he said that he's not going to win on appeal, then he's probably right. He certainly has a better legal sense of what is going on, okay, than I. But he is going through the appeal, right? Okay, are you saying to me that Stephen Donziger is not going to appeal the sentence? Kay says, can't wait, Joe. And Caratini said he's running as a Green. His slogan is not a Democrat, but not a Republican, okay, a New Yorker. I think that's great, and I'm sure that he's fascinating. But, as I said, there's a time question involved, and I have to be very selective. Lana says, oh, good, juicy news, laugh out loud. Lana says, I wish AOC would just go away, sorry. Kay says, welcome to my boring page, Laura, laugh out loud. Carity says, thoughts on Cenk Uygur wanting to actually physically fight Joe Rogan. But Joe Rogan was an MMA guy, so I think it's hilarious. I think that's just for clicks, Shane. Laura says, just so you know, Kay, I only really come to Facebook for Joe's live streams. Before this, I had totally abandoned it, and it was Jeffrey, Denton, and Dolores who continually share to and support the Red Berets FB group. So just don't feel badly if I don't respond here. Find me always on Twitter. Yep, Laura is the Twitter master, the absolute Twitter master. You should have seen her today. She was on fire on Twitter the whole day. I didn't know that anybody could be so good on Twitter, or I wouldn't have known, except I've seen her do it before. And Ghostart said, Rogan would destroy. Ugh, laugh out loud. And Laura leaves the YouTube channel, okay, of the Red Berets. She leaves a link but to the channel for everybody. Go there. She's going to be doing it tomorrow. Ghostart says, no, they're not going to release him from house arrest while he waits for trial.
I thought he went to trial yesterday.
Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's ridiculous. He's already been convicted and sentenced, and he's appealing it. Do they really think there's a flight risk?
He's got a home and a family.
I mean, that's ridiculous. He should appeal that too. Shane says, the reason I think you should talk to him is because he knows MMT. Well, that's a good reason. How well does he know MMT? If he knows MMT, then maybe I will reconsider. So ask him how well he knows MMT. For example, you could ask him if he's read any of my books. And Kay says, we are a corporatocracy. We are. And, however, I think actually Rebecca's comment concerning what we're getting to be like is exactly on point. There are certain people who act like they're feudal lords. The Koch brothers act like they are feudal lords. Sheldon Adelson acts like he's a feudal lord. In some ways, George Soros acts like he is a feudal lord. He has his own domains, and his own organizations that he has contributed to for many years, and his own people who are running those organizations. Now, generally, I have a pretty good opinion of George Soros, actually. I don't have a bad opinion of him compared to some of the others. But I do think his pattern of relating to people and the organizations that he's close to is the pattern of a feudal lord. He's the feudal lord, and they are his vassals. That's what we're looking at there. And that's what we're looking at with Sheldon Adelson and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. They're all feudal lords. And KRTD Media says, Shane says, that's a good question, my last question. KRTD Media says, reckon your book on the $1 trillion coin to him. He seems to like the $1 trillion coin idea a lot. Okay, my book, Shane, is not simply about the $1 trillion coin. It's about platinum coin seigniorage in general. And my book actually advocates for coins with really, really big face values that would change our politics. It was the first piece to come out with a $60 trillion coin proposal that preceded the $100 trillion coin proposal. Okay. Well, actually, Stephanie wasn't making a proposal. She just was imagining. She was imagining the $100 trillion coin because I think she thought it was a better meme than the $60 trillion coin, and she was right. It's a better meme. $100 trillion coin is a better meme. So today I only talk about the $100 trillion coin. Carmen Yuna says this is neo-feudalism, which we are enslaved to. And Laura Fielding says, angry face at their shameless greed. I know. I don't think Soros is guilty of shameless greed, though. He stopped accumulating some time ago. He stopped accumulating. He divested himself of, I believe it was 2/3 of his holdings, and he turned them over to the Open Society Institutes. So they're now part of a charity. I think he retained $8 or $9 billion for himself. Still substantial, highly substantial, but he's no longer in the same league as, Michael Bloomberg or Bezos or Zuckerberg or Gates, Warren Buffett, the Google billionaires. He's no longer in the same league, okay, as these people. He reached the top of $26 billion, and then he started to distribute his funds, okay, to various places. I think he's something like 85 or 86 now, maybe even 87. So I think he's, more relaxing now and letting other people work his holdings, but he hasn't been increasing them for some time. Kay says, buying them up in California cities and many others too. Shane says, I'll ask him how well he knows MMT. He seems to know our federal taxes don't pay for anything. He supports the federal job guarantee. Well, I may want to have him on in one of the Red Berets series programs. Fit him into another role while not, I don't know if I really want to talk to him about his city council race, okay, in New York. And Kay says, why are Gates and others buying up farms everywhere? I don't know exactly why Gates, is buying up farms. He may be buying up farms everywhere because he wants to plant a lot of hemp. He may think there's going to be a lot of money in hemp.
You can make furniture and all kinds of stuff out of it.
I think he's more interested in sequestering the carbon.
Clothes.
That's more what he's interested in, I think. Anyway, that's all I know about it. I've gone through all your comments now. I think this was a wonderful session tonight. We've had a lot of wonderful sessions. They seem to get better and better. I'm looking forward to next week. I hope by Monday I'll have my card filled for the whole week. I have to fill Wednesday and Thursday right now with some more Red Berets activists. I was thinking of inviting Courtney Love, at this point.
The nurse. When's that nurse coming?
But Nurse Mariana Everson is coming next Saturday. She's agreed. I have booked her for Saturday. Shane says, I'll ask her. Kay says, why are Gates and of course, I didn't think he was interesting for that reason, just his MMT knowledge. Howie Hawkins interviewed and endorsed him today. Well, that's good. Howie Hawkins' endorsement probably means something, in New York City, in running for the city council. But my endorsement doesn't mean anything in New York City anymore, even though I'm from the Bronx. And Laura Fielding says, thank you and good night to you all. Thank you for coming, Laura. Thank you for participating. I didn't expect you to be able to participate as much as you have tonight. Laura says, thank you for a great discussion and show. And she says, good night, everyone. Shane says he wants to do state-based Medicare for all in New York. Well, that's very good. So maybe what I'll do is have him on for that reason as part of the Red Berets series, and maybe have him on with some other people, in the Red Beret series. And KRTD says, so he may fit into FOAF as well. Yes, he may. I think that's a very good suggestion. It would be great to get some New York people who are interested in FOAF. That would be very good. Kay says, thank you, Joe, and everybody for a great discussion. Again, love you all. And Laura says, yes, that would be great. And also Catherine Lewandowski, also known as Billy Lou, right? She is Billy Lou, correct? And Lana says, good night. And Laura Fielding says, nurse vice chair of Whole Washington who introduced me to Whole Washington when she saw my early Red Berets online. And yes, Courtney Kirkus Love, says Laura Fielding. And Carmen says, pleasant dreams. Hope they're not about P&V. Good night. Shane says, good night. Great show tonight. Lana, going to call with the gossip in a few minutes. Nora says, yes, that sounds very productive. New York contingent by Scott Denoyer. Scott Denoyer could recommend. Yes, he could. Maybe I can have a show on state-based in New York State with Sharif and Scott and DeJesus. Is his name DeJesus? Again, I got to look at it again. That you wrote it. Now that you suggested it, Shane. Yeah. Yes, Billy Lou is correct on Twitter. Thank you, Laura. And Go Start says, Washington, D.C. Women's March crowd estimated to be 500,000. So they still haven't reached 1 million. And Shane says his name is Edwin DeJesus, right? It's DeJesus, right? I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And Laura says, and organizer of New York Health Act, but whose name is Ursula, don't know her last name, but Scott is in good touch. And Shane says, yes. Okay, everybody, good night. Have a wonderful evening. Shane will be meeting tomorrow late in the day. I have not forgotten. So I will see you then. And a good night to everyone. And I'll be back on Tuesday with Jeff Epstein, who's wrote a recent blog on minting the coin. And he and I are going to have an in-depth program on minting the $100 trillion coin and its implications. And that should be a very interesting show, including from the standpoint, of Medicare for all, because, of course, it's going to be much easier to have Medicare for all if you've got 100 T sitting in the Treasury. They won't be able to plead poverty any longer. And Laura says good night. Kay says had a couple of thousands in Cleveland today for the Women's March. Shane waves, and Kay says night all. And we love you too, Kay. So I'm going to end the broadcast now.